My talk is called Coding at Scale. It's the most creative name I could come up with. I'm the lead engineer at a company called Plated. I'm the lead engineer for one of the teams there. Hello. About myself, so I've been in New York for about 6 years and working in Silicon Alley. I've worked at a number of startups, mostly consumer focused, nothing B2B, always B2C. That's always been sort of like, where I've wanted to be. So just, working for stuff that that real consumers and users interact with. I said earlier, I work at a company called Plated. What we do, if you haven't heard of us, we offer a weekly chef-designed menu of recipes, and we send you pre-portioned ingredients for you to make these meals at home. So if you're someone who likes to cook, or were like me, who was terrible at cooking, Plated might be something you might be interested in. So what does this talk about? Well, it's mainly about the software development lifecycle. It's about how software gets developed and how that changes over time at scale. And it's really about just when an idea occurs, when someone has an idea, and how you turn it into something you actually use. And then how that happens again, and again, and again. And it just never stops. It's all about taking ideas and turning them to real things that people can use. So you guys are, I heard week 9, right? Of developers and stuff. So what do you guys think is the job of a developer? How would you guys try to describe it based on? Anyone want to take a shot?
To write code.
It's to write code. That's not untrue. Anything else? Any other ideas of just, outside of just writing code? All right, so to what? To problem solve. So when you're writing code, who's going to use these things? Is it going to be, it's machines? Machines are going to interpret this code, right? But at the end of the day, who's going to be using this code? Who's it going to affect? It's going to, people, users, right? So I like to describe the job as a developer in this sort of way. I think it's to deliver valuable experiences to users. And at the same time, you want to do it at the lowest responsible cost, right? Because you can't take forever to deliver value. So let's talk, so I'm going to break this down, starting off with valuable experiences. So when I say valuable experience, I mean something that might be utilitarian. It helps someone get something done more efficiently. It might be entertaining. It might be just help someone pass the time, think Netflix or Hulu. It might be informational. Might help someone learn something, like Codecademy or Wikipedia. Or it might be social. It might be something that helps people stay in touch, like Instagram or Snapchat. So where do good ideas come from? Because, ideas are a dime a dozen, right? I'm sure you guys have heard that before. Well, I think good ideas start with a problem that you're trying to solve. It starts with identifying a need for a user. So identifying need is a pretty basic framework to think about it. It's, someone wants to do something, someone has an aspiration, but they can't do it or they find it difficult because they don't have a certain thing. So for Plated, that was, I want to cook more or cook at all, like in my case, but I don't have time. Have you guys heard the term MVP here? So MVP, right? What does it stand for? Minimum viable product, that's right. Minimum viable product is the idea of just building enough to prove it. Building enough, just enough, that you've proved that this is a need, that this is a problem that someone has, and that you're at least close or approaching that solution. You don't have to solve it perfectly right away. It may be just enough to find out, is this a real problem that people, need solved? So this is the original Plated website, maybe iteration 2 or something. We used to be called Dine In Fresh, so there's some trivia for you. Terrible name. But yeah, they finally came up with Plated. We had this, and it was this, it solved the problem, right? You had a menu, you had, information on how it works, you had confined pricing, past recipes that we've had before, and a cart where you can put everything in and get those ingredients delivered to your home. So the need was, right, or at this point, we solved the need, right? We built the MVP, people could order food, people were getting the boxes, people loved it. I think if you scroll down, there were testimonials and stuff like that. But as you learn more and more about a customer, the problem evolves, right? You learn more about the need, you learn more about what the problem actually is. So at this point, we ask the same question yet again, or we try to identify like the need, maybe iterate on the need. So I want to cook regularly, right? So we're cooking more, right? But now maybe people want to create a habit out of it. People want to, instead of just one-offs here and there, like people want to cook every week. But they can't because planning is time consuming. And we found that planning was time consuming with our website. Like we had this product that you could, cook with and get the groceries, but we had this problem. We had this thing called the cart that is now very infamous at Plated. Because for you to get the food, you'd have to go into the menu every week or every time that you wanted to do it, pick what you wanted, put it in the cart, and there was a lot of friction attached to that. So we knew that this was a problem. We knew that we weren't doing the product justice by having this whole cart concept. So then we started thinking, what can we do instead? Started breaking down the idea. Have you guys seen this format of breaking down work before? So this is called a user story. And a user story is a way of describing a change that you want to create in the software for the benefit of the user. And it follows this very basic format. You're going to see this a lot when you're working professionally. As a blank, as a role, right, as a user role, I want to do something, right? I want something to be possible so I can, and then whatever value, whatever experience that's supposed to provide for you. So for us, the way that we sort of broke down this story or described it was, as a Plated customer, I want to plan weeks ahead so I can cook regularly. As opposed to having these one-off, like put it in the cart, order it, it'll show up eventually. Like, maybe you want to think of it more as a menu, as almost like a meal service, right? As opposed to just like a thing that you do one-off. So we thought, well, if we allow people to plan weeks ahead, then they'll be able to cook more regularly in a way that's a lot more frictionless. So the next step after breaking down that idea is testing the idea. So this is one of our senior designers, Emily Regal, actually cutting up paper prototypes of the website to put in front of people to get reactions. And this was just step one of then creating wireframes and then creating more designs and putting it in front of people and interviewing them and getting more ideas. So after testing the idea and validating that, yeah, people would use this. This is something that people are interested in. If you're talking to real customers, people have been with us for months at the time or maybe a year. We were pretty young at the time. We validated that this Epic's user story was something that we wanted to build and was worth building. And we call it an epic because breaking down work just like this is just too much, right? Like this doesn't really describe like all the steps that it takes to actually get to that end result of planning weeks ahead and cooking regularly. So we call this an epic user story. And an epic user story gets broken down into smaller user stories. So I want to be able to see 4 weeks ahead. I want to be able to skip weeks. I want to be able to pick recipes for a week. Trying to break it down. It's important to break down work into small possible chunks because everything will be more achievable. It will feel less daunting. You can share the work and communicate about it a lot more easily. You can distribute the work. So you guys are doing like teams of 4 right now, I think. So you'll want to break down things as small as you can into something that's parallelizable so that, because if you're all trying to solve that one big problem at the same time, like you're just going to be running around each other. So this is pretty simple, right? Like, for us to create this whole plan weeks ahead thing, we just need to get these 3 or maybe a couple handful more stories done and we've got a product, right? We've got something that'll help people plan regularly. But we had this problem. We had a previous version. We weren't starting, anew. This wasn't a brand new thing we were doing. This was an evolution of an existing idea. There's an elephant in the room, the cart. This is a picture of a real cart that I can't say how we acquired, but we spray painted. And it has a lot of meaning to us right now because it represents an era of Plated. But yeah, so the cart was the elephant in the room. And the problem was that when you create a box on Plated.com, or we used to create a box on Plated.com, you got billed for the box, right? So our product is $72 a week. We're the premium product in the space. We're more expensive. Like, if you want to plan 4 weeks ahead, that means you have to pay $288 up front. And nobody wants to do that, especially if you're going to cancel 1 week or skip 1 week. What are you going to do? Like refund that, put into credits? Like, it's a really complicated thing. So all these stories had a caveat because we had a previous product, a previous iteration, that we want to be able to do these 3 things, but without being billed. So that's sort of the segue into the other part of, sort of like the job of a developer, which is you want to deliver valuable experiences, but at the lowest responsible cost. This does not mean get it done as quickly as possible. The previous version of Plated was done as quickly as possible. And what it meant was that this elephant in the room, this cart, was not something that was easy to change. The idea of creating a box and not being billed for it did not exist. That assumption that every time that you have a box created, every time you change recipes, you get billed for it, existed everywhere in the code. And we're talking, at this point, 100, if not 200,000 lines of code. So when you make that assumption everywhere, it's going to be a lot harder to change. We're going to dive into that a little bit. It's the idea of cost of change. Cost of change is one of the most important things to be aware of if you want to be a responsible developer. Because the harder you make it for someone else to go in there and change something, like if the market changes, the product changes, someone has a new idea, the more you're going to be stifled. Because the cost of change, it's low at first, right? You guys are building these new products, like, you're just gluing Stripe or whatever it is that you're doing to build your, is it Stripe? Did I get that right? Nice, yeah. So you guys are integrating with that at all?
I think some
Some groups are?
Yeah, others are just kind of stubbing it out. Yeah.
Gotcha. And is it like, are you guys building a cart? Like, is that what you guys are doing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Most of our time building carts.
Yeah. I mean, that's the really, and you guys are going to be done in a couple weeks, right? So hopefully you'll have a finished cart, like it'll work, right? And we had a cart. Like it's not impossible to build a cart, right? Like, entry-level students can do it. Like professionals do it all the time. But if you're not careful, that cost that's really low at first, that cost increases exponentially as the feature set grows, as the team grows, because apps evolve really fast, especially when you're a startup. Your first 1 year, like your second year, like it's going to evolve really fast. There's a lot of unknowns, a lot of new features people ask, because it starts off with something really simple, right? You order groceries, no big deal. But then like, oh, well, people aren't ordering enough, or like, people don't know to order, when things become available, so now we got to do email. And then, we got to do like, tracking of the sending of the groceries. Like, we want people to be able to log in and see where it is, like tracking numbers, like things like that. And then, oh, well, we got to grow faster. Like maybe we'll do referrals because people want to share, Plated with their friends, and maybe they want to get rewarded for it. So that's going to be something to build. And then, oh man, like we've gotten pretty big. Like we got a whole customer service department now. People are taking in phone calls. They need an interface to be able to, it can't be just, Josh Hicks, our founder, like, querying the database every time that someone gets a call. Like we're getting, hundreds of calls a day at this point, and people need to be able to respond quickly. And as you get bigger and cost becomes more of an issue, you need to be able to start forecasting orders. So maybe we want to start building some tools around that. And then, well, now we're, transition to subscription, or, we want to start recommending recipes. So we got to build a recommendation engine for recipes. And then analytics, because we hired some data person who has no idea what's going on, and they need us to build them all these tools. Maybe we want to do gift cards because, Mother's Day is coming up or whatever. So, and this can all happen, this all happened in, I don't know, a year? Maybe a little less, And it's actually not that complicated when you got like one person. Like it's just, a lot of late nights, a lot of coffee, and, and a lot of like, not seeing your significant other or whatever. But, once you start, but it's easy because like, or not easy, but since you have a pretty good, since you wrote all the code yourself, you know where everything is. Every time that your founder comes to you and is like, oh, can we do this? Can we change this copy? Can we do that? Oh yeah, no problem. I know exactly where that is. I'll change it. I'll deploy it real fast. Like no big deal, like 10-minute changes, lots of 10, 20-minute changes. But once you start getting overwhelmed, you might get another developer, like, whatever, one other developer, you guys are sitting next to each other, ask you a quick question, like, oh, where's that file? Oh, it's over there, no big deal. But once you start growing more, it's growing more, and growing more, like you can't be having, like, this is when you start having like meetings and all these things, like people disseminate information and people get frustrated, they don't know where anything is, and different people will have worked on different features, right? So now going back to this whole, feature set, like you got some people that worked on customer service, some people that worked on referrals, some people that worked on engage through emails, and then, when suddenly like, okay, well, the next thing that we need to work on is a recipe recommendation service, you really only got 2 people who know anything about this. So if they're busy, or worse, they quit, or even worse, they got hit by a bus, which is a real thing. Look up the bus number. That's like a real like project management term. If they're gone, now you got very few people have worked with this code base before, and the cost of change is going to be huge because they don't know anything about this code. They're going to have to research it. They're going to have to look into it. They're going to have to reverse engineer it. So that's where it becomes really important, and I really value code that is easy to maintain over code that is easy to write. And the cool thing about that is that, programming languages are not for machines necessarily, right? They're for people. If we were just writing for machines, then we'd be writing assembly all day. But why do we have stuff like Java, like Ruby especially, Python, right? Like all these English-like languages, Rails. You guys are doing Rails, right?
We're doing mean stack, actually.
Oh, mean stack. Okay, great. So like inspired from Rails. So the reason that these things are, the way that these things are designed is not just, to be fast, right? Like, making computers fast, that was solved a long time ago. But making computers easy to work with and easy to scale software with, well, that's where like, mean stack, Rails, like Django, like, all these technologies, become really important. Especially because a tech business can only move as fast as its developers can. Like, you will find this. You will find that you will be the constraint to the evolution of whatever business you join. Because at the end of the day, like if it's tech, every time that a new feature, a new idea, comes through, like you are the downstream last step. You can have 100 designers, you can have mock-ups coming in every day, but if you guys can't code those mock-ups fast enough, like it doesn't matter how many ideas your product managers come up with, it doesn't matter how many designs your designers come up with, like the business will only move as fast as its development team. So you have to code responsibly. You have to be a responsible coder. You have to be a good, developer citizen. And these are just a couple of, examples of, what coding responsibly might mean. So first thing might be thinking before you name. So this is where I'm going to do live demos, which are always a bad idea. So I'll keep the slides here just for convenience. I think I got a file here. Thankfully, I don't have to run it. I don't know how to fold in Sublime. Anyways, anybody tell me what this code does? Like just at a glance. Sign up users. What else? Shipbox. Well, what is it? Okay, send an email, right? Anything else? That's about it. You pretty much got it, right? But do you really want to be working with this code? Is this something that you think like, I had to scroll quite a few times for you to find out everything that this class does. So let's talk a little bit about the problems in here. So first off, as far as like, naming responsibly, what do you pass in to sign up? Well, I don't know how to fold. Let's just cut this. Maybe it was spoiled already, but like, sign up users, right? What does it take in? Not really descriptive, right? Can you find out by looking at the rest of the code what it takes in? Takes in an email? Just one email? It's a list of emails. So, but it took a lot of deciphering, right, to figure that out. And if this wasn't here, if this was the next line, like if this was like, down here for some stupid reason, like, which is a very reasonable thing, because maybe somebody wanted to like join these lines or something. Like, yeah, you'd never, if it was like this, like you never would have figured that out without like some real like reading and like, reverse engineering. So an easy way to fix that is, well, emails, right? And I go plural, not singular, right, because it's going to be a list. Really bad at Sublime, so. All right, so that's one thing. So naming responsibly, right? And then the C, right, is a client. If you were down here trying to figure out, like, what this is supposed to be like, you wouldn't know what that C.puts is. You wouldn't know what C is. You'd have to like scroll up and be bouncing around, and bouncing around is not fun. So naming can be really important. See if I remember how to do this. Does anybody use Vim here? Out of curiosity. Nice. That's usually what I use, but I couldn't figure out the white background in Vim, so I'm a little stuck here. Actually, let me see if. Let me know if you guys can or can't see this, and we'll just give it a shot, because I think it'll be a much more valuable demo. It's fine? Okay, perfect. All right, so excellent. All right, so email. I guess that's it. or emails, right? Emails, and then this will become client. Oh my God, I have to do this over and over. So this is really annoying, right? I want to do one simple change, and like, sure, like Sublime can do it really nicely or whatever, but it's still like all this repetition is really killing me. So I'll leave these names for now. This is supposed to be user, date, user. See, so now it's starting to make sense, right? Like, you know, it takes in a user, it takes in a date. This date goes here. What is this E? I don't know what this E is. I think it's supposed to be emails. No, it's users. If I'm trying to fix a bug right now, I'm losing half an hour, maybe an hour and a half, just trying to figure out what the hell this code does. And then because I'm trying to be a good programmer, right, or a good citizen rather, I'm trying to leave this better than I found it, but because some previous developer, I'm trying to come up with a polite word, left this for me and I have to fix it. So right now I'm getting frustrated, you guys are getting bored. So you can see sort of like how important, you know, thinking about it like a little more up front, like think about your naming and stuff like that, you know, can really help. Now one thing that's pretty annoying too is when I was trying to fix all these naming issues, there was a lot of, you know, like I had to fix client, this whole client thing in 2 places, right? We're naming C to client, I had to fix that in 2 different places. Even though, just judging by what's going on, it looks like they're doing pretty much the exact same thing. So next thing is don't repeat yourself. If you can avoid repeating yourself, you're going to have a much better time. Because then when you have to make changes, which changes will never stop, then you can only do them you'd only have to do them in one place. So looking at the repetition here, I can see that, oh wait, well let me split here. So if I look at these 2 methods, the sign up users and ship box, there's a lot of repetition here. Right, so saying hello to the mail server, saying where the mail's coming from, it always comes from deliciousness@plated.com. It's always going to send it to a recipient, an array of recipients. And it's pretty much the exact same thing, right? So it looks like we can avoid repeating here. Make a little send email. It takes in, let's see, a recipient. Actually, it takes in recipients. And it takes in, looks like a notification type. So if I just go ahead and take this, move it down here, recipients, because array doesn't mean anything to anybody. This is a bug. See, I found a bug in everything. Look at that. So, and now, send email. Let's call it, I guess, emails. And then notification type. That's supposed to be, let's say, sign up user. This is supposed to be box shipped. And just by avoiding the repetition, now you can tell me everything that this class does without having to scroll up and down. You can tell me exactly what the business logic is and not have to be distracted by all the noise of what it takes to actually send out an email. Because it doesn't matter. If all you're trying to do is, you know, change the template or like change the business logic, like maybe you want it, you know, to, I don't know, I can't contrive an example right now. But let's say someone asks you to like, you know, change something in these 2 methods, like now you don't have to dig through all that code. You don't have to dig through that stuff. And that applies in different ways, right? So isolating responsibility. Right now, this class does a lot of things. It signs up users, it ships boxes, and it sends emails. Why would you want to do all that in one file? So one thing you might want to do to isolate responsibility is maybe make something like an email sender. Make this a class method. And now I got something that knows how to send emails really well. And now when you have, you know, your email pro that you hired from Google come in to do all your emails, they only have to look at one file and not have to get distracted by all the other business logic. Or if you got someone who just wants to change the business logic, they don't have to get distracted now. by all the crap that you have to do just to send an email. Because this is going to be one file, right? So you can imagine, like, these are now like 2 separate files. And now you started to organize your code a little more. You've isolated responsibility. And this is sort of an example of using abstraction to simplify code. So it used to be that you'd have everything in one file, and like it's still going to do the exact same work. Like we haven't changed anything at all about what the behavior of the code is. All we've done is move stuff around. We've abstracted the idea out of sending emails. We've said, okay, well, what you need to send an email is a list of emails and what notification type. And that's it. Now, anybody who's looking at this doesn't need to know anything about how complicated it is to send email. This is a much simpler, do you guys agree? It's a simpler way of looking at the code. And now when someone wants to change, or if you want to fix a bug, like you're going to have a much easier time finding out where it is. And there's a really awesome quote around this. This is actually the guy that invented the function, the subroutine in computer science, David Wheeler. All problems in computer science can be solved by another level of indirection. Indirection also meaning abstraction. So sometimes, like, when you have a problem, when you have something that's really complicated, like all you need to do is add another layer to simplify it, to hide the details, This is actually not necessarily a talk, but there's a really interesting quote as well from, let's see, I forgot which author it was actually, or which writer. I think it was Hemingway. Oh, I don't have internet. Well, anyways, I think it was Ernest Hemingway. He had this thing called the iceberg theory, also known as the theory of omission. And what that means is when you know something really well, when you have all the details sort of like your head wrapped around it, you don't have to give all the details. You don't have to show everything. You don't have to be explicit about everything if you want to explain something to someone and have them understand it. Because you're going to do such a good job at focusing on what really matters that even though that just by describing that, you'll have a good idea of like, what's under it. Like, like with an iceberg, right, you only see like the top, but there's like a lot under it. So with this, like that sending emails is complicated, but you're only showing that one little bit. And you're keeping it simple, you're not being overwhelmed. So that's where indirection and abstraction can be really helpful. Another thing to think about is separating work and state. This might be a little more advanced, but basically it's just the idea of separating, the code that actually does the work from the code that actually stores the value. So in this case, for example, we're sending in these values. If we want to, sometimes you might want an object that represents just like a message, or just a certain value, right, that you would build somewhere else. So the idea would be instead of just having an email sender here that takes in these primitives, you'd have something like an email message, and then this would be I guess like a struct. Do you guys know structs or even talk structs? So it's basically just like a class that just holds a little some values. So where there's recipients, notification type. Recipients. So you'd have this object that just stores the values, and then you would just construct these things here. So you have email message, emails, box shipped. And then so the idea here is basically what you're doing is having a class that just focuses on the structure and like what actual data you're passing around. Because this message thing, it's very simple. Like you would think like, oh, that's a little complicated for just emails and notification type. But as your classes get more and more complicated, you might want to write tests around it or do whatever. Separating classes or objects that just store values from objects that also have functions and do a lot of work can really help out, especially when you're doing automated testing. Have you guys done any automated testing? Okay, perfect. So like for example, what you might do in a test is you might make like a mock object here that then you could be passing around, and that way email sender just has to, it's going to be a lot more functional, just focus on the work. So yeah, so that's that. Let me close this. And one thing that I think is also really important is that your code should always reflect the state of the user experience. So like I said earlier, like I know that the email message object is going to get more complicated just because of the nature of how businesses get more complicated and how communications get more complicated. But I'm not going to spend time trying to implement all that right now. I just want it to reflect the state of the code base and the user experience right now. I want to make sure that it's using all the same terminologies that my marketing person uses, that my ops people are using, that the product managers are using. Like, I'm going to make sure. So for example, one problem that we had, oops. Oh, my computer's lagging. One problem that we had was that they used to be called menu orders. Can't seem to move. All right. So we used to call them menu orders instead of boxes. So that means that every time the developers talked about sending out a box, we would say send out a menu order, and everyone at the company would be like, what the hell are you talking about? What's a menu order? It's like, oh, it's what we call boxes. Why would you call them boxes? So you want to always use the same language that everyone at the business is using. That'll help a lot with communication. I forgot what the other one was, but my thing isn't even working. Let me see this. There we go. So yeah, use the same language that everyone at your company is using. Make sure that that it represents the actual state of the code or the actual state of the product and not some invention of what you think might happen. You should not predict changes and implement them in code, but anticipate them, right? Like you want to avoid costly changes to the code, but you don't want to build something so complicated and spend a lot of time building something that you might find out 10 weeks later, oh, hey, Rick, it turns out we're not even going to be using that. Why don't you throw it away? And that happens more often than you think. So be careful with over-engineering. Anticipate change, embrace change, but don't predict it. Don't try to invent something that, just because it might be cool or because you think it's going to happen. Just avoid that. Another thing that'll really help for you coding responsibly and coding quickly is automating your testing. So you guys are doing automated tests, it sounds like, which is really important. That's really great because, the last thing you want to do is make a change and then have to go in, test 30 different pages yourself, deploy, and find out that that 31st page actually broke. You don't want to get that call in the middle of the night like, hey, we can't acquire customers right now because that thing that was completely unrelated broke that other thing. Having automated tests really helps you make sure that you're deploying often, deploying quickly, and have worry-free deploys. Which being scared as a programmer is another thing that really impacts cost of change. If you're afraid to touch code, you definitely have a big coding problem because you think things are going to break or whatever. So going back to what sort of started this whole talk, or this whole idea, which is delivering valuable experiences at the lowest responsible cost. I think that it has a lot to do with just how we think about the impact that coding and code has on people. I think that's something that's really important to have as a developer, especially working professionally, is empathy. And when I say empathy, I mean empathy for the users and for the developers. Thinking all the time, thinking as you're writing code, as you're making decisions, as you're making trade-offs. What is valuable to users? Is what I'm working on actually going to be impactful? Is it actually going to make someone's life better? Or am I just doing it because someone asked or because someone thought it might be a good idea? And not every idea that a user gives you is going to be valuable, by the way. Sometimes users really don't know what they want. And you have to go in there, test. That's why testing is so important. Interviewing, talking to as many users, using data, things like that. Understanding what's valuable to users is going to help you make sure that when you build something, people actually use it, people actually love it. Because there's nothing worse than spending a lot of time building something that nobody uses. That's a really shitty feeling, and I've been there before. And also developers, right? So how can I keep developers happy? How can I make sure that when I write something and then someone else wants to go in there and make it better, which is a great thing, that someone cares enough about what you built that someone wants to make it better and improve upon it, that they're not going to have a hard time. That they're not going to spend most of their time, 80% of their time, trying to figure out what the hell you wrote, at 2 in the morning, and then spend only 20% of the time actually making it better. You definitely want the opposite. So at the end, I think that software is a lot about people. And keeping that in mind as you're coding, I think will make sure that you go a long way and build things that are valuable not just to users, but to developers as well. So thank you. Do you guys have any questions or want to talk about something? Or life, code?